2016. And I'm Diane McNeil. I'm the new president of the association, or the Historical Society. And even though I've been involved for a long time, I'm finding out that there's a lot I don't know, and I'm on my way of trying to learn a lot fast. First of all, anybody who's not a member or would like to make sure your dues are up to date, we have these little forms that you can take and fill out and become a member. Jim, standing back with the camera, is our treasurer. He is more than willing to check your expiration date of your membership and or take your dues if you're not a new member, or if you're a member. So anybody want one of these forms? Okay. And I'm going to give you this at the same time because you came in late. There is all our meetings for the next year. Oh, okay. This is for the membership. Make sure your dues are up to date.
I went in the other day.
Okay, good. That's what I want. We also give a high school award every year. We try to give $1,000 to one of the high school seniors that's going on to college who thinks local history is important. They have to write an essay of why local history is important, and we have a committee that picks one of them. And we try to give, it's the Laurie Duncan Award. It's after our past president who passed away in 2012 or 13. I'm not sure.
13.
Anyway, so any contributions you want to make for that is always accepted. Okay, any questions? If not, I will turn the program over to David. He's going to tell you about our archives. And as you will see, the archives is up and running and thriving and filling up all our space that we now have downstairs in the Village Hall. We did want to have the program there, but since it is difficult to get down the stairs and we weren't sure about parking if there was snow and everything else, we decided to have it here, and David is doing the PowerPoint presentation so you can see what it looks like that way. Okay? I will turn it over to
Thank you. We're here because of the Historical Society, and most of us have an interest in things that are old. But the reality is things that are new are equally important. And in a twinkling of an eye, things that we take for granted may, to another generation, be incredibly important. And virtually everything in the archives that we have, at one point in time, had been taken for granted. And by fluke, they were saved. But think of all the things that were lost that could easily have been saved today. Something as simple as a receipt, or a bill, or a letter. When we pick a theme, let's say World War I, think of the letters and correspondence in our own families that dealt with the war, either as soldiers or impacted or coming from Europe or being a part of it. How many of us have those letters today? And you think back, if we could only revisit our youth, and put aside those things from our grandparents that they said were important, that at the time we dismissed. Yes? We're all guilty of that. And it's an incentive for us to keep track of things that are brand new, that in a twinkling of an eye could be really important. Now, I said that for a reason. Obviously, it was important, but for another reason. Nan and I just got back from California. And the reason we just got back from California is our first grandchild. Now, it turns out our son and daughter-in-law were due on January 2nd. But, as fate would have it, we got a phone call. Nan, when?
Christmas morning.
Christmas morning. So, our son Wixon and our Christmas baby. You talk about a present, Christmas present. There he is. His name is Augustus Adler Stevens Greenwood.
Oh.
Augie for short. And every single one of those names has an association. But we left him yesterday morning, and I would say that for the 5 days that we were actually there, not counting the transport back and forth, Nan probably averaged at least 3 hours or more a day of holding him. So, and she has other photographs. If you would like to, during our break later, see them, she'd be more than happy to talk about it. Now, something else that's new, and this ties into the Historical Society and the archives, and that's the new bank calendar. Now, many of you have them already, but if you haven't, I encourage you, stop by the Bank of Millbrook and take a few of them, because they become really important. 2 years ago, George III, we all know George III, George III was interested. We were talking about how many of the calendars were taken and where did they go. So we asked people to fill out, as they took them, where they might be sending them. And it turned out, 2 years ago, that these Bank of Millbrook calendars went to 40 states and 7 countries. Now think about it. 40 states, and why? And some of you may have actually done this. We have family members who grew up here and now have relocated, and the calendar becomes a touchstone, especially if it's something like one-room schoolhouses, or horses, or farm life, and you have relatives who are part of that tradition, the calendar becomes really important. So I encourage you, pick them up. Now, that has done something else, and that is, because they've been distributed to various family members and friends all across the states, when someone in Florida is cleaning out a house that belonged to great aunt whoever, and they come across something, and they think, oh, the Historical Society in Millbrook might be interested in this. And guess what? That has happened over and over and over again. And most recently, when we incorporate the illustrations into the text, we talk about where things came from. And it's hard to see, I know, but February is Valentine's Day. And February's theme happens to be Bennett School. Why? Because the Historical Society was given a photo album from 1913 by a family member in the South who wasn't quite sure where Millbrook was and thought Millbrook was New Jersey, and found out through another association, no, it's Millbrook, New York. And that ancestor had come to Bennett, and the photo album had postcards. Now, how many of you have postcards of Bennett? I would say a lot of hands would be going up, because they're really common. And indeed, postcards from Bennett are in the album, but also were individual, one-of-a-kind photographs of students, sports activities, and events. And what I love is a mock frame that was set up that the young ladies at Bennett made, covered with flowers and hearts, and then the young girls put their best dresses on and sat behind it as if they were pin-up pictures, if you will. Valentines from the young ladies at Bennett. I've never seen them anywhere else, and now we've got it documented. But something else happened, and that is the woman who put that album together in 1913 took the time to write the name of the students under virtually every single photograph.
Oh, wonderful.
Wow, that's extraordinary, because we all have photographs, but how many of us have taken the time to write the names on the back? How many of us have taken the time to write the names on the back?
And the date.
And the date. And the date. So
And there
that's...
was no photo of her. How
and-
many times have you taken a picture and, you don't get in the picture?
So, and that's what's so fascinating about it. So we'll be seeing some of those images tonight. Another thing that we sort of take for granted. And that is, if it's a book, it's got to be precious. So by and large, generally speaking, books are more than one copy. So if you have a 1967 yearbook from Millbrook High School, guess what? Chances are there's more than one copy around, right? So books are very special, but they're not unique. There are different kinds of books. Sometimes you have a historical society publishing a book like Carmine Derpino, this book on the town of Washington. And Susan, is Susan still here?
No, she left.
Okay, she left. Susan was talking about our society republishing 50 more copies of Carmine's book because they constantly sell out. And a lot of those books survive. Other books like this, The Letters of Samuel Thorne, this is called a vanity publication. And vanity publications are, if you have enough money to be able to do it, you could publish anything you want. And very often, vanity publications tend to be a very limited edition. So you're not going to have 10,000 of them, chances are. You'll have several of them, or 50 of them, or 100 of them. So in the scale of things, by and large, most historical societies are going to have locally published books in the archives. And we have them here. And anyone who's doing research can come either to the library or to the archives and actually read about Samuel Thorne's letters and read and do research on them. Very common. But what is less common and really unique and precious. So you have Samuel Thorne or Sally Gifford. And Sally's original notes and sketches that she did. These are her memory books. These are the images that she put together and drew of different buildings. These are all one of a kind. So, Samuel Thorne, Vanity Publication, Sally Gifford, original drawings. This is what the archive is famous for. Preserving the individual letters, the individual items that could easily have been lost. Now, everyone in here, or most of us, should know Sally Gifford and Gifford House. But this is the kind of thing. This is a finished pastel that she did. And when she moved out of the area, she was going to throw them all in the dump. Because she said, who would want those? Guess what? We do! We do! So we have quite a nice collection of Sally's original pastels and drawings. And that makes the archive really worth a visit. And I encourage you, please, if you haven't come and spent some time with us, come and investigate. You'll be seeing a lot of these in my PowerPoint in just a minute, but one last thing is original letters and correspondence. Now, for anyone who's looked at letters from 100 years ago, or 150 years ago, or 1811, you realize penmanship and script has changed greatly. Now, most of us know cursive because we were taught it in school. And if we're old enough, Palmer method was what every teacher ingrained in us. Palmer method, Palmer method. And you know what we found today? That most young people can't read them because script
is no longer.
Has gone the way of calligraphy pens. No one does it anymore. But you look at the thumbs, and they've aced it. So original letters, preserving them becomes really important, and documenting and transcribing them becomes really important. Now, this is a photocopy. Why am I holding a photocopy and not the original?
Originals down in the class.
Thank you, Linda, hit it on the head. Say it again
We
louder.
don't trust you.
You don't trust me. The reality is, anyone could spill coffee, or sneeze, or accidentally misplace an original document. So at the archives, what we're doing patiently is making copies, so we have copies that are available for access if you're going to be researching them, transcribing them, and so on. And in the proper setting in the archives, yes, you can look at original ones, original deeds, but it's very, very specific. And I guarantee you don't take your cup of coffee and your sandwich when you're looking at some of the original ones. Well, that's enough of my talking. Let's start the PowerPoint. Linda, thank you. Now, you all know the building. In 1907, 1908, there was a real concern in our community about young people drinking too much. And there were a number of taverns in our little village, and people were concerned that this was a bad precedent for young people. So, what grew out of that concern? The YMCA. Basically, it's a temperance organization to prevent or discourage people from drinking. And in 1914, we built locally, this was underwritten, the Thorne family, Samuel Thorne and others, helped to underwrite the creation of this YMCA. And the YMCA became a destination where young people could come and pursue healthy activities rather than going to the neighborhood tavern for beer. The early photographs, you'll recognize the building hasn't changed much. Next. Some of the images, like this is from a previous calendar, show you the building with bunting on it and the interior of the bowling alley, which is at the bottom level of the building. I'm sorry about the focus.
Let me see. That's it. Can't preserve.
Well, it really looked like it was in focus when my wife and I put it together. But that's small format, it's
right.
this. Okay. So, the bowling alley, the interior of the building, was designed to accommodate a number of activities. How many of you had your classes, your gym classes there? Okay, most of you in the room. I guarantee that was before 1967, because 1967 is when it stopped being used for high school, for the high school and middle school classes. But for a couple of generations, that's where virtually every student in the village went to take advantage of this extraordinary facility. We did a presentation on it a few years back, and some of you may remember that when it opened in 1914, it also was the first public building in our village where young people, anyone, could take a shower. You were restricted though, no more than 2 showers a week, by the way. That was part of the stipulation for it. Inside shot. Next, Dan. Sorry. Thank you. Here we are today. It hasn't changed much at all. Some of the things, we now have access by ramp, which is important. That's sort of the building adjusting. You'll recognize Museum in the Streets, the walking tour signs that we have. So as people come around the village and learn about it, they can see what the original structures were and how they were used. Next. But if we go to the interior, we see that the building was designed to accommodate a meeting space. We use it now, the village, for its monthly meetings, board meetings, and other meetings. You've got a fireplace. The original building had a fireplace. This was modified and updated. That's a whole other story. Next. And as you walk through that room, the archway, the staircase that goes upstairs, but you continue by the staircase into the next room. Slide. and the gymnasium. And
Balcony is gone.
yeah, and that was just what I was going to ask. How many of you remember the runway that ran all along the top? It was the balcony. When it first opened, it was designed so that you could run on the inside of the building in 1914. Healthy occupation. That space is still being used today with the recreation department and other events. But what an extraordinary facility for the community. And in 1987, the Village Hall took over the building, and it became the headquarters for the village and other activities. The recreation department still uses it, but we were fortunate enough in a short time to be able to go downstairs next. And to do that, our virtual walking tour, you walk to the back of the main room, meeting room, past the coats and jackets and the recycling and the trash, into the hallway, and next, take that great staircase. And ladies and gentlemen, that's why we're meeting here and not there. That staircase is incredibly steep. In 1914, I guess they expected young people to be running up and down that staircase, not, shall we say, senior members of the community, at least not to bowl. The staircase, though, is one of the reasons that the archives is really very awkward. There is a rampway on the exterior. You can go to the back of the building and then come along into it, but it's very awkward. And we realized this time of year, with snow and ice and lighting and parking, it was better to have the virtual tour than to actually be at the facility. But I encourage you in good weather, be in touch. Come and spend some time with us and see the originals. So here we go. We're walking down the staircase. We turn the corner. And there we are. Destiny. This is our door. And if we get close enough to be able to see the sign, this is what it says. Welcome to the Town of Washington, Village of Millbrook, Historical Society Archives. For information or schedule an appointment, contact Kathleen Derringer. And Kathleen is the one who is currently in charge of the archives. And a word about the archives, and you'll see photos as we march through this. But I have to acknowledge Ginny Augerson, because Ginny is the inspiration for this archive. So what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, Ginny, we're going to applaud you right now. When the society's been around since the 1970s, and over the years, the society sort of inherited, sometimes helter-skelter, but inherited things. And at the town hall on the second floor, there was a closet. And Ginny and I and others started putting things in the closet, and it got to be a packed closet, let me tell you. You couldn't wedge another thing into it. And that's when the realization was we had to find a more permanent spot than just a closet to put things in. And that's when we made the transition to the lower level of the Village Hall. And we were fortunate enough to be able to take one of the small rooms that was behind the bowling alley and modify it. Thompson Shaw, many of you know Thompson, took a wall down, we redid the flooring on it, expanded the size of the room to accommodate what is presently the archives. So let's go through the door and see what we see. The first thing on the wall of the narrow hallway is a series of postcards and blow-ups. The postcard history in our community is also very interesting, and I did a presentation on that a few years back. We had drugstores, Upper and Lower, Allen's and Sheldon, and there was a rivalry about where you bought your postcards because they both produced their own postcards. And it's fascinating to see what the logo is and when the postcards were first created. postcards have not always existed. They date actually to the very beginning of the last century. And when they first came out, you could only put the address on one side, and you couldn't write where the address was. If you wrote, it had to be where the photo was. So we have examples of postcards from 1903, 1904, with the address on one side, and then on the other side where you've got a picture, people have said blah, 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 whatever it may be over it. Very quickly, the government realized that wasn't going to work. So they then came up with the divided postcard that we think of today, where the address goes on one side of the back and the comments on the other. So you can date when the postcards were actually created by the format that's being used. Next. And that's an example. This one happens to be Allen's Pharmacy. Upper Drugstore, you may recognize. Charlotte's, depending on frame of reference, or this was actually a boarding house before Charlotte's. The main street, notice it's not paved. When the street were laid out, they were actually gravel streets. And some of you, again, our generation and older, remember when there were carriage steps made out of stone up and down the village. And the last one that I remember was quite near the diner, the diner in the village, and then it was gone. But those stones were designed so that the carriages could come up and ladies could step out of the carriage and down and not show their ankles. So that was really important at the time. We didn't have to hitch up to get up to the wagon. Next. When you get into the main room itself, and that's where we are now, you realize it's a combination of storage, archive boxes, index cabinets, books, records, photographs, all the things that make a society function. And there I am with Kathy and Bernadette looking at some of the items that have been donated. Next. What we do, and this is important, and if you haven't come, you wouldn't know it, but anytime we have a visitor, including the volunteers who are working, we sign in. And Bernadette is signing into our blog. That's really important, not only to document who's visited or worked there in the time, but it also becomes proof to show how often the archives is being used. So if we're looking for a grant, if we're looking for money to help underwrite a project, we've got evidence that indeed the archive is being used at least 2 or more days a week, and very often it ends up being 4. So depending on your schedule, do stop by, sign in, and see what we have. Now I mentioned not everything has to be old. Old is such a relative term. You can't quite see it very easily, but this is the Thorne building, Thorne Memorial Building, and it happens to be an original drawing, this is a print of it, by Mike Spross. And Mike is a high school art teacher and has done a series of drawings of buildings in the area. And they're all very collectible and available. If you go into some of our buildings in the village proper, you'll see where they've been framed. And Mike was kind enough to give us a set so that the archives have his drawings as well as the original postcards and or photographs for it. Next. You can't help but associate local history with individuals. Who is this? Carmine Derpino. Carmine, who taught at Bennett for a number of years and was really interested in local history and was inspired by Louise Tompkins. And we'll talk about her in just a minute. But in the archives, we have photographs, we have individual items. Next. Hats, buttons, pins. Don Marshall, when the bridge was opened across the Hudson, he was very much a part of that place. These are the kinds of things that, by and large, we all accrue. We all have. We have them in a drawer. We have them in a closet, top shelf. And these are the kinds of things that, if they have an association, become typical of a historical society. Next. Also photographs of important buildings. And the top set, these are all safari photographs that show safari stonework and identify members of the safari team when they were working on the objects. They're incredibly important because they help to document part of our history and our community. And indeed, some of us may have relatives in those photographs. Others recognize the individual structures depending on the source you're using. This could be known as the Anson Mill, which is in Harts Village on the east branch of the Wapaja Creek. Or some of us may know it as Daheim, the mill for Daheim, because the Dietrich family ended up expanding it. Or some of us may even know it as Malela's, because the present owners are the Malela family. And we're hoping that in this, the end of this year of meetings, that we'll actually have a program on the Malela family and learn about what they have done and how they help to preserve it. It's an extraordinary building. Here's a question for you. How many of you have been on the inside of it? Okay, for those of you who've been on the inside, you realize it's extraordinary. And one of the things that the Malela family did is they kept the gears and cogs from the mill. So you walk into it, and it's not only a wonderful space looking down into the stream bed and the dam, you realize how extraordinary it is as a machine and the power that was produced by the water in that stream. And it helps you understand why Millbrook ended up being here because of the stream bed and the incredible natural resource of water power, and how many generations of local families depended on that water power for livelihood. An extraordinary complex. I believe that's going to be October that we're having that as a tour. Is it, Allison?
October 8th.
October 8th. So mark it on your calendar right now, because it's going to be wonderful. Another person who's really important, it's a little hard to see here, but Louise Tompkins. And I mentioned Louise before, and why she was such an important part of our community. Next. And if you see the statue, some of you remember Mr. Finelli, who was a sculptor in the area, who actually did this to commemorate Louise. Louise is a real inspiration for anyone with local history. And she was a neighbor of the Benham family and Tower Hill. Lots and lots of great stories. We've done presentations on her and all that she contributed to our community. But my favorite story about hers, and forgive me for those of you who've heard it before, but it ended up being that she was appointed as the town historian in 1973. And when she was appointed, she was concerned that because of her physical limitations, she wouldn't be able to do much with it. But in point of fact, it was her mind, and that was important. And for from 1983 until the year she died in, I think, 92, she published at least once a month an article on local history. And those have been combined, and select ones have been copied and put into a book form. And you'll see another aspect of the program we're doing next. There I am with Bernadette. And Bernadette is in the process of coordinating the postcards and putting them together so that anyone has access to them. Next. And Kathy, the same thing. As we get items, and we make copies, but we put the original ones, depending on the source, of course. But it could be in an album like this, so that the theme may be blacksmiths. So you can pull out a volume in our archives, and it's all about the information we have on the blacksmiths in the area. Or it may be on businesses, local businesses in the area, or it may be school related or farm related, but lots and lots of materials. And they're put into a special plastic to help preserve them. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Next. Susan, who was here earlier, and I'm sorry that she left because I was going to have her describe what she's doing, but Louise Tompkins had those weekly articles, and they were clipped and put into a scrapbook. And what we're looking at are the actual newspaper articles that were published. They were all pasted down into the book. And what the volunteers in the archive are doing right now is carefully taking them out of the scrapbook, photocopying them, putting them into the kind of binder that we'd all have access to, and putting them in by date, so that there's a chronology of what she wrote. But also, we have duplicate copies, and some of those copies will be going into, like blacksmithing, so that there may be a crossover in terms of what she wrote, but also the topic and content. And that's where the archives becomes really useful, to be able to retrieve the information. Next. We've done a presentation on this as well. These are the Beriah Swift mills, coffee mills. And Beriah Swift was a blacksmith in Hart's Village, and he patented a cog. Now, you all know what a cog is. It's basically how things can connect, and as you rotate them, the cog allows the machine to function, to roll, let's say, without coming undone. And he took that cog device, here's the wheel with the cog on the inside, and he created a grinder. So his fame is patenting the cog and creating a coffee grinder. And the first coffee grinders that he did looked like this, rather modest affairs. But he did more than just coffee. That cog design was for grain and larger items as well. So you've got floor models that could be used in a shop where you could grind lots of coffee, but you also patented and created ones that could be used in a barn for grinding up fodder and food for animals, cattle, and so on. The cog mechanism is really important, and they always say Swift's patent and the date on them. This one that was given to the Society a few years ago, and that's the one that the Rotuno family had. And Charlotte was very proud of the fact that one of the first things her dad bought when they came here from Italy was a Swift coffee grinder. And Nan and I were fortunate enough to be able to have coffee at their house with the sisters. And guess what? They still ground the coffee with that same coffee grinder. At the time, Charlotte was 104, by the way. That's how they did the coffee. And after Charlotte died, Tess decided that it really should come to the archives. So we now have it as part of our legacy and that tradition. And next. Linda?
David,
Yes.
the big one, wasn't that the one that Bryce bought and?
Bryce made the connections for it, and it ended up being in the bank and
it was in the library for a while.
for a while.
Well, that came from the Midwest, didn't it?
Because those grinders were distributed everywhere,
Right.
everywhere. And they were such an important item, and you could literally go just about any place in the country and find them. And that mechanism still works. I mean, unlike today's plastic, by and large, the coffee grinder will continue grinding in perpetuity. So Linda, in addition to manning the equipment, is very active and involved in helping to document what's in the archive boxes. And this is a good chance to talk about what these are. So often, when we save things at home, we'll look around to see what kind of box we may have. So let's say you have a shoe box. So great-grandma's letters, or those documents from World War I or the Civil War, ends up being in the shoe box. And that shoe box may end up being in the attic or in the cellar, or in the barn, or wherever. Guess what? That's not the best place to put those precious documents. For one thing, that shoebox is acidic, and most cardboard, most materials are acidic, and you put acid next to paper or any object, and chances are the object is at best going to discolor or potentially disintegrate. Now, we talked about the newspaper articles. Newspapers are notorious for being acidic. And how many of you have clipped newspaper articles of family members, graduations, weddings, whatever it may be, and you look at them 50 years later and they've yellowed or gotten really brittle and are virtually unusable because of it? If those articles were put into a scrapbook the way Louise had hers put in, their chance of lasting longer is very good. But we are taking them out and photocopying them because it's a matter of time before that paper is going to disappear. When we have the documents, we put them into this kind of box, and it's called an archival box. And an archival box is basically a glorified shoebox, but now the material is acid-free. And it's designed so it's for ease and convenience. So if you have a file folder, calendars, back to Millwork calendars, and you want a collection of them, you can easily put them in something like this, and they're preserved. But normally, you're not just going to throw it in the way I did. You're going to take the object and put it in acid-free paper. And that acid-free paper will prevent the material from one of the objects to migrate to another object. Acid-free. So virtually every important document that we have in the archive is covered with tissue paper that helps to protect it, and you'll see that in the next instance. So here we have the box. Here we have images, photographs. They're in plastic sleeves to make it convenient so that we can pull them out and use them. File folders. The data is entered on the end of it, and every single one of these has a different theme. Right now we're in a transition because we're going from the old system of using index cabinets and file folders to putting them in archive boxes and coordinating them. So right now it's a little frustrating to retrieve the information, but eventually it will be much easier for all of us to be able to use. Next. The old system, the old way of doing things, bookcases, bookshelves, we all recognize them. By and large, most of the books that you see are multiple copies and easily available through libraries, historical societies, your own home collections, and they're relatively common. But by housing them all in one location, it's easy for anyone to do research to come and use them at the archives. In addition, we have items that, like family Bibles, and most of us have a family Bible. The Bible, by and large, is pretty consistent. Most Bibles are. What makes them special in a family Bible is what? The family. And almost every one of them is going to have a section where you can add names, and children, and grandchildren, and other dates that there may be. That's the kind of thing to photocopy and save and preserve. Because that very often, that's the only tangible evidence that you may have for relatives from 100 years ago, the way they were written in the book. And by and large, if you're cleaning out Great Aunt Tessie's cottage, and this is on a back shelf in some room, chances are this isn't the kind of thing that your grandchild or great-nephew is going to want. So these very often end up going to the dump. And most book dealers aren't interested in them because they're so common. But the information that's precious is that very beginning where you've got the family information. So that's what we tend to save. Next. All kinds of storage space. You've got the boxes, of course, but we also have trifolds. These are presentations that were created to go to different schools and societies so that if we're talking with children about whatever it may be, they're easily available. But you also get offered things, movie posters, events, libraries, maps and documents. All of these are in the process of being taken care of, coordinated, and documented for reference. Next. And this is an example of the kind of thing that came. This is the scrapbook from 1913. Now, it looks like a regular scrapbook, and it is. Notice the tissue paper, the box it's in, to help preserve it. Let's open it up. Next. And there you go. All original photographs. And underneath, who's who? Most of them have the names. And that's what makes it extraordinary as a document. And the family was so pleased to know that we really appreciated getting them. And the family was so relieved that they did the right thing by their family members. Imagine the guilt of being told, okay, save this, don't let anything happen to it. And yet no one in that next generation really wants it or knows anything about it. So to find a good home for the objects is really important. Next. And this is a bit of fun too. If you look at it, the cover is for a textile booklet. So if you were making clothing, ladies, and most of the time you might want fringe or fabric on something, or if you're Italian and a tailor and you're doing a vest or an outfit and you need a detail, you could look into this book and find the textile that you needed and order it. It could be ribbing, whatever it may be. So you look at it on the cover and you think, okay, this is pretty common. But when you open it up, next, it's a scrapbook. So that book was recycled, and in it are lots and lots of newspapers. Now remember what I said about their yellowing? Look at them. And the articles in them, some of them are almost impossible to read. And it seems to be random, but these are all articles that deal one way or another with Greater Millbrook. The churches, the histories, and so on. And a lot of them are very common. Next. Articles about George Washington. Well, if you want an article about George Washington, I guarantee any library is going to have lots of information. One need only think of the cherry tree, right? Everyone knows the story. But what made this collection really special is that one of our volunteers who's been doing family research came across an obit for his first ancestor who had come from Ireland. And it's about this man coming from Ireland with a photo. And for the descendant who has done 30 plus years of research on his family, that's the one photo he never, ever could find. One of that original ones. And guess what? Here it is in a scrapbook filled with other articles. So the fluke of finding something is always there. And notice the tissue paper? That tissue paper is between every page of the book, so that the yellowing from the discoloration, even though it's bad, is not going to get worse because of the tissue. Next. And of course, other details, we've got the photocopier, we've got the map, the volunteers, Ginny, of course, you recognize as well, all of our volunteers who come and give hours, an hour a week, 5 hours a week, whatever, to helping to copy, coordinate. And what they're doing right now is actually photocopying those original Louise columns that Susan was taking out of the scrapbook. Next. 1858 map, one of the most important maps that we have, because it locates by name where the individual families were living. And the maps, a story about the map, God bless New York State, because in New York State, local history was mandated. And what that did, what that meant was, every single one-room schoolhouse had, from the 1850s on, a map. And the map documents the county, Here it is, Dutchess County, the locations and the individuals with towns, villages, and so on. Because they were so common, they tended to be discarded because they were out of date. Out of date means the names change. For us to be able to have a copy, these become a great resource and research tool. And it also shows where the roadways were and the property connections. Next. And to show how up to date we are, our archive even has an emergency exit. Isn't that great to know? So if we were there and suddenly that precarious staircase was unavailable, we couldn't get up to the top floor, guess what? We could all shimmy up the cabinet, out through the window, and out through the grate. Isn't that exciting to know? There's always an alternative. Next. Some of the documents we have are really precious. Samplers. This happens to be a 9-partner sampler that was made locally. And we have the research and the information on the young lady who did it. And we inherited it from a historical society, I think it was in Maryland, that had it as part of a collection that was given to them of samplers. And yet Maryland had no interest in having a local sampler. So, because of other associations, we contacted them and they were overjoyed to give us the sampler, knowing that we would take responsibility and care of it. So that's why it's here. Next. And documenting technology from a sampler where you do individual letters by thread to having a keyboard. Just shows you how sophisticated we are in working. Next. And this is Susan, one of the projects that she has taken on. These are the trifolds that were put together originally by the Society to be used in scouting groups and local classes, high schools, middle schools, and so on. And this happens to be the war effort. And what Susan and her volunteers are doing, they've gone through all of them and taken off the photographs, original photographs, and put photocopies on them. So that this, if heaven forbid you stole coffee on it, guess what? It's okay because the originals are safe in a different location. But these have become really very useful. So teachers who have a theme and want to learn about it can borrow them, use them in the classroom. Next. The old way of doing things, index cabinets, this is what we all grew up with. You put them in a manila file, put them in the folder, and that's where they live. The new system is much more efficient and much more organized. Next. The binders we spoke about, each of them labeled with a theme, so you can pull out if you want to find out whatever it may be, whatever the theme may be. Mills, let's say, we have a folder for it. And they're all photocopies and things so that they can be easily used by the general public. And this is Jack. Jack is part of the Dean family, the greater Dean family that we all know about. And this is a photo that came down in his family of the interior of it. And he has let us copy that, so we've got the original archive, in our archive, a copy of the interior. Next. And here it is in this year's calendar, Bank of New York calendar. So this is the Dean brothers, we know it as Moronas, and this is the interior, and the two brothers who were very much involved with it. But that's the kind of thing that with the archive resource, we can all use and have available. Next. The cover, we're almost done, so I apologize for taking so long, but thank you for indulging me. The cover of the calendar is actually a postcard premium that was sent out by Reardon Briggs. And they were advertising horses, buggies, wagons, and so on, because the original shop that Reardon Briggs descended from specialized in farm animals and horses. And this is a quality blanket. So if you went there, you'd get a quality blanket for your horse. And we ended up, because of it being in the town of Washington, we thought the horse would be a perfect example. Next. And this just recently, with George and this year's calendar. This is actually, we're right now in our 20th year of making calendars. So this coming calendar will be the 20th official calendar that we're going to be doing. And next year's calendar, the one that we're beginning to work on now, the theme, we believe, is going to be Bennett, past, present, and future. So be on the look for it. That'll be a year from now, next January. But it's been a great tradition. Next.
No bet on it.
And lastly, talking about new things and old things, Bennett, of course, is near and dear to everyone. But what Bernadette is doing, the New Year's Eve Millbrook tradition that we have, and many of you have taken advantage of that. Every year we've created a button. Students have generated the designs, selected, and you wear the button for New Year's Eve. Millbrook, you walk up and down the street, you take advantage of the music, the different venues where it's lots and lots of fun. If you haven't done it, I encourage you. And what I love about it is the number of people that come wearing all the buttons from every year with great pride that they have them. And this year's button, next, is the last slide. This is the design that Kayla Critelli did, a high school junior, when she created it. And it was selected for this year's button. So each year, we have students creating designs on those, and every year it becomes a collectible, a collector's item, and the archive is making sure that they save those as well. And we are in the process right now of selecting next year's design for the button. They're due the last day of January, and we have over 200 students who've already submitted their designs for it. So I'm looking forward to being able to share with you the next 2017 button design when we make it. So that's the presentation. Thank you for joining me at the archive. And do come for a real visit. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to encourage everybody to come down and also indulge in some refreshments and come up and look at the different displays of how things are displayed there. And back there is Chinese New Year's cookies in little packages, and feel free to take some home. And there's a lot of them, so you should have those as part of your Chinese New Year's celebration.
And make a point. This is show and tell, so pick it up, look at it, see how it's constructed and how they're put together. They really are the state of the art, and virtually every archive in the country is going to be using this kind of lightweight yet solid box, and they come in every size imaginable. Yes?
I have a question. On one of your slides, you had an article in plastic. Now,
Yes.
do you use plastic?
Yeah, it's
I'm
archival
very
plastic.
surprised at that.
Yeah, it's archival plastic. This is
Oh,
so that anything that we put in, and that's where we're very fortunate that Kathy Derringer, the woman who's coordinating it, professionally, this was what she did for her entire career. So she is using her professional expertise, and guess what? We don't have to pay for it. So we're putting the monies, the grants that we get, go into buying the materials that are all state of the art.
And most
so
of
it's
it comes from New York.
archival plastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
But
archival.
what about the photocopies? Are they acidic?
A photocopy, it depends on the quality of the paper, and usually the better quality paper. But those copies, photocopies, are designed to be used over and over again. So that's the trade-off for it. Photocopies are stock in trade. And if someone comes down and we've got an original document, oh, this is an example of something that came in this year, and I mentioned it at one of the earlier meetings. We were contacted by a descendant of the Merritt family, and they had some things they thought we might be interested in, and no one wanted any of these things, so would we be interested in having them? So the archive and the society, Stan at the time, said yes, yes. So what came was a box. Well, imagine a small suitcase, okay? You open it up, they're all original Merritt deeds for the village. From the time that it was sold from the Haight farm into the Franklin Merritt, property by property by property. And in it is describing who the individuals were, how much they paid for them, what was on the site, what the arrangements were. Extraordinary. For anyone legally looking at this, to have those documents is extraordinary. And guess what? They would have been thrown out because they didn't mean anything to the descendant family out of the community. And those are really special. And in addition to the deeds, there are also mixed up with them accounts of how many sausages, how many dozen eggs, whatever the family had at the beginning time, and it was the barter system. Okay, such a person gave eggs, and in exchange they took whatever. To have that kind of day-to-day activity in our own village is wonderful. So you'll hear a lot more about those papers too. So please enjoy. We've got refreshments.